Welcome back to the deep dive. I want you to try something for me right now. It is just a little mental exercise. I want you to close your eyes, unless you are driving. Please do not close your eyes if you're driving. But if you can, close them. Now, try to locate yourself.
That is a slightly dangerous request to start a deep dive with, I mean.
Just bear with me. You probably feel like you're located somewhere right behind your eyes, right? Like there is a little pilot sitting in the control room of your skull looking out through the windows. You feel solid, you feel singular, and you feel like you occupy this specific point in time right now.
Yeah, that classic I am here feeling.
Exactly. But what if I told you that feeling is, well, a lie? What if I told you that the you behind the eyes is just a temporary localized focus, sort of like a cursor on a screen, and the actual you is massive, sprawled out across centuries, and quite possibly living in ancient Rome and the year 3000 at this exact same moment?
Well, if you said that, I would say we are definitely in the right deep dive today, because we're basically going to dismantle the box.
We really are. We
Right.
are peeling back the curtain on one of the most mind-bending sources we have ever covered. We are diving into the Seth Material. Specifically, we are traveling back to Monday, January 16th, 1967. This is session 312 from the early sessions, book 7.
And this session is an absolute beast. It is one of those rare moments where you get the highest of the high and the lowest of the low colliding in the exact same hour. On one side, you have this incredibly complex, high-level metaphysical architecture of the soul, concepts that just challenge the very nature of identity and time.
Right, and on the other side.
On the other side, you have a parlor game. Literally a woman in a rocking chair, in a trance, holding a sealed envelope to her forehead, trying to guess that there is canned black pepper inside.
It sounds so ridiculous when you pair them up like that, like the architecture of the cosmos and a packet of pepper.
It does, but that is the beauty of session 312. Seth, the entity speaking through Jane Roberts, uses the pepper experiment to actually prove the philosophy. It is not a parlor game. It is a laboratory test. It is the practical application of the theory that the mind is not bound by the physical brain.
Right, but before we get our brains completely twisted into pretzels, and they will get twisted, I need to make our standard declaration. This deep dive will be distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes. We are here to explore the material, analyze the arguments, and just see what sparks fly.
Exactly. We are not here to convert you. We are just here to hand you a flashlight and show you where the cave goes.
So let us light it up. The session begins with what I can really only describe as a total demolition of modern psychology.
Oh, it's a complete teardown job, absolutely.
Seth opens by addressing the very concept of personality. Like if I ask a listener, who are you? They give me a resume. I am a lawyer, I'm a mother, I'm anxious, I like jazz.
Right, we define ourselves by our history and our current context. We see ourselves as a line, a linear progression from birth to death.
And Seth says that is the fundamental error. He says, and I really want to quote this directly because it sets the stage for everything else. He says, to arrive at any real understanding of human personality, you are not dealing with one linear self.
That word linear is essentially the villain of this deep dive.
He goes on to say, the self is indeed multidimensional, and the driving force behind the self does not reside in the ego or in what you refer to as the subconscious.
Let us pause and unpack that, because that is a very radical statement. We are all used to the Freudian model, right? You have the ego, which is the conscious I that makes decisions.
Yeah.
And you have the subconscious, the basement, where we hide our trauma and our dreams.
Yeah, the old iceberg model. 10% above water, 90% below.
Seth is saying the distinction is totally arbitrary. It is a man-made border. He actually calls the self an energy gestalt.
Energy Gestalt. That sounds like something straight out of a 1960s sci-fi novel. What does he actually mean by that?
A gestalt is a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. Think of it like a corporation. You have the CEO, the janitor, the accounting department, the sales team. They're all separate people doing completely separate things. But together, they form the corporation. The corporation acts. It decides. It is a living entity made of many parts.
So in this analogy, the guy sitting here talking into this microphone, am I the CEO?
I hate to break it to you, but in Seth's view, you are more like the regional manager for the 21st century branch office.
Ouch. Just the regional manager.
You are what he calls the apparent identity. Seth uses that exact phrase, apparent identity. You are the face the corporation is wearing right now to interact with this specific physical reality. You have the authority to make decisions, sure, but you do not have access to all the files at headquarters.
Because if I did, I would just be totally overwhelmed.
Exactly. Seth points out that the more of reality that is perceived, the larger the dimensions of the self, or identity. The reason you feel small, the reason you feel linear, is because your perception is heavily limited to this one room, this one time.
Right.
If you could perceive what your colleagues in the corporation were doing, say your past life in 18th century France, or your future life on a moon colony, your identity would expand. You would realize you actually are the corporation.
This leads to a paradox that really tripped me up when I was reading the transcript. Seth says, the unitary self is basically an illusion, and yet individuality is no illusion.
This is the deep end of the pool right here.
Because how can I be an illusion and real at the exact same time? That feels like a massive contradiction.
It is about boundaries.
Yeah.
The illusion is the unitary part. The idea that you are a closed box, that you are only this regional manager. That is the lie. You are not a closed system. You are open. You bleed into your other selves.
Okay, so the box is the illusion.
But the individuality, the unique flavor of your consciousness, the way you specifically experience joy or sorrow, that is real. That is inviolate. Seth says diversity is an absolute necessity for existence.
He has this beautiful, almost poetic line about this. He says, to some extent, that which is must always be lost within itself, lost in a multiplicity of numberless selves.
Lost in a multiplicity of numberless selves. It strongly implies that the source, or all that is, or God, whatever term you want to use, had to shatter itself, to experience itself.
It's the lonely God theory. Like, if you are one and you know absolutely everything, you are bored. You are completely stagnant.
Right. To learn, to grow, to experience surprise, you have to fragment. You have to create numberless selves and let them get lost in the game. You have to let them forget they are God so they can experience the actual thrill of being human.
It is like when I play a video game. I do not want to play in God mode where I cannot die and I have infinite ammo. That gets boring after 5 minutes. I want the struggle. I want the stakes. I want to get lost in the character.
That is the perfect analogy. We are currently lost in the character, and Seth is the guy whispering in our ear, saying, hey, just so you know, you are holding the controller. You can pause the game if you need to.
But we have forgotten the controller even exists. Which brings us to the character sheet of this game we are playing. Our psychology.
This is where Seth gets highly critical of the scientific establishment of his time. He says modern psychology is basically trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
He makes a very bold claim. He says, a fully developed psychology will not exist until reincarnation is accepted as a fact.
Think about that for a second. If you go to a therapist today with a phobia, say, a terrible fear of tight spaces, what do?
They dig into my childhood. Did I get locked in a closet? Was my mother claustrophobic?
Right. They look at pre-adulthood tendencies. They look at your immediate environment and your genetics. They assume the absolute cause of your personality lies in the years since you were born.
And Seth is saying the cause might actually be a few centuries older than that.
He says the prehistory of the individual is completely ignored. And he does not just mean, oh, you have a ghost memory. He gets right into the biology of it. This is where it gets highly technical.
The electromagnetic blueprint.
Yes. This is fascinating. We are taught that genetics are a lottery. Sperm meets egg, genes shuffle, and boom, you get blue eyes and a tendency toward anxiety. It is random.
Right. It is just the luck of the draw.
Seth says no. It is not random at all. It is highly ordered. He says the whole self, the corporation, creates an electromagnetic blueprint based on its past experiences and its future goals. And this blueprint dictates the formation of the physical chromosomes.
Wait, so the soul builds the DNA?
The soul orders the DNA. It chooses the exact genetic cocktail that fits the mission for that lifetime.
That completely flips the cause and effect. I am not anxious because I have these genes. I have these genes because I needed to be anxious.
Or because your larger self decided that dealing with anxiety was the specific challenge you needed to master in this particular level of the game.
That is strangely empowering. It takes the whole victim status away. It means I am not a victim of my biology. I am the architect of it.
It is very teleological. It is purpose-driven. Seth calls it value fulfillment.
Can you give me an example? Like, why would I consciously choose to be bad at math? Or why would I choose to be short?
Well, let us say in a previous life you were a warrior. Just a hulking brute. You solved every single problem with physical violence. You were great at it. But you never developed your mind. You never learned diplomacy or empathy.
Okay, so I maxed out my strength stat, but my charisma and intelligence were stuck at 0.
Exactly. So for the next life, your whole self says, okay, we have done the brute thing. We need some balance. So you create a blueprint for a body that is physically smaller, maybe even frail, a body that literally cannot win a physical fight.
So I force myself to use my brain.
You constrain yourself to force growth in a completely new direction. So your physical limitations are not punishments from the universe. They are strategic constraints you picked out.
That changes everything. It means our flaws are actually features.
They are the curriculum. But, and here's the real kicker, Seth says we totally misunderstand when this curriculum is even happening because we are so obsessed with linear time.
The spacious present. This is the concept that always makes my brain hurt just a little bit.
It is the hardest hurdle for the Western mind. We live by the clock.
Seth says, in the spacious present, there are no such terms as past and future. But I had breakfast. Now I am having this conversation. Later, I will have dinner. That feels intensely real. That feels sequential.
It feels real because your brain is specifically designed to make it feel real.
Yeah.
And we have to make a very sharp distinction here, according to Seth. The brain versus the mind.
He separates them completely.
He does. The brain is physical matter. It is a camouflage mechanism. Think of it like a VR headset.
Okay, I'm with you.
When you put on a VR headset, it blocks out the rest of the room so you can focus entirely on the game. The physical brain blocks out 99% of reality. It blocks out your other lives, the thoughts of others, the future, just so you can focus on this moment, this breakfast, this exact conversation.
So the brain is just a filter.
It is a reducer valve. If you perceived everything at once, you would be catatonic. You could not function to cross the street. The brain slices reality into manageable moments so you do not go insane.
But the mind, on the other hand.
The mind is the user wearing the headset. The mind is not physical. It is not limited by the brain's biological wiring. So to the inner self, the past, present, and future are all happening simultaneously.
So the me in ancient Rome and the me in the future, we are all existing right now, side by side.
In the spacious present, yes. It is like rooms in a house. You might be in the kitchen, which is the present, but the living room, the past, and the bedroom, the future, still exist. You just aren't physically standing in them right now.
But Seth says we do actually visit them in our sleep.
This is the part that gave me chills. He says dreams are essentially time travel.
He explicitly says, in the dream state, however, what would appear to you as future lives are already familiar.
Already familiar. Just think about the implication of that for a second.
It means I have already lived my future.
It means that deep down, you know exactly where you're going. You know who you become. You are drawing on that wisdom right now, today.
So why do I not remember it when I wake up?
The sensor. The physical brain. You wake up and the brain says, whoa, hold on. I saw memories of 2035 in there. That is impossible. That violates the linear narrative, so it deletes the file. Or it scrambles it into some weird symbolic dream about missing a train or losing your teeth.
It is covering its tracks.
It is preserving the illusion. Because if you knew the future perfectly, if you knew exactly how the game ends, you would not play the present with the same passion. You need the illusion of the unknown to actually learn the lesson.
It is like spoilers. The brain protects us from spoilers.
Precisely. But the intuition, that gut feeling, that is often a leak. That is a little bit of the future bleeding through the filter.
This major distinction, that the mind is software and the brain is just hardware, leads Seth to a very controversial point about brain damage.
It is highly controversial. He argues that because the mind is completely independent, it continues to operate perfectly, even if the physical brain is damaged.
He says when the individual is convinced that his activities are completely dependent upon the physical brain, then he is incapacitated almost completely by any injury to it.
This is the nocebo effect on a massive scale. If you believe I am my brain, then when your brain breaks, you fundamentally believe you are broken. You stop trying. You surrender to the physical damage.
But Seth suggests that if you realize you are the user and not the machine,
then you can bypass the damage. You can use inner senses. You can perceive reality directly without the physical eyes or the physical neurons. You realize my screen is cracked, but I am still here.
And this is not just theory for Seth. He decides to practically prove it.
Which brings us to the pepper.
The 80-second envelope experiment. We have to set the scene because the contrast here is just so funny. We've been talking about the grand nature of time and the soul, and now we are suddenly in a living room in Elmira, New York.
Right. Rob, Jane's husband, has taken a double-thick envelope, he has sealed it tightly, and inside he has placed black pepper, common kitchen pepper.
Jane is in a trance. She is Seth. She holds the envelope up to her forehead. Now, if I am skeptic, I'm saying, okay, vague guesses incoming. She's going to say, I sense something important, or I sense a dark color.
But she does not do that. She gets microscopic.
She says, a miscellany of united objects or images, of small patterns like dots, but larger than small dots, light and dark.
That is a direct hit. If you look at ground pepper closely, it is not just black, it is a mix. Light gray interior granules, dark black exterior husks. She's seeing the actual texture.
She goes on, she says a cloud-like or leaf-like effect, or like pebbles.
Again, very accurate. The fine dust from the pepper creates a cloud inside the envelope. The coarser grains look exactly like tiny rocks or pebbles.
But then, and this is where the spacious present comes back in, she stops describing the pepper itself and starts describing the container the pepper came from.
This is remote viewing 101 in the Seth model. You do not just see the object, you tune into the history of the object.
She says, something upside down, difficult to tell top from bottom, a roof-like shape.
Now, that makes no sense at all if you were just looking at pepper grains. But it makes perfect sense if you look at the shaker Rob used in the kitchen. It was a modern shaker, filled from the bottom.
So Rob had to turn it upside down to fill it.
Yes. And the design was ambiguous. It was hard to tell top from bottom. Jane picked up on the specific confusion Rob felt when he was handling the object earlier.
She was reading the energy gestalt of the event, not just what was inside the envelope.
Exactly. But my favorite part is absolutely the squirrel.
Squirrel connection. This is the part that actually explains how intuition works better than any textbook I have ever read.
So Jane suddenly says connection with a squirrel or small animal.
And the skeptic screams, aha. Wrong. There is no squirrel in the envelope.
But Seth explains why she said squirrel. And it is brilliant. It is all about translation.
Break that down for us.
Okay. The inner self, the mind, perceives the raw energy of the object. It perceives small, hard, grainy seeds. It sends that raw data down to the physical brain.
Okay, got it.
The brain is essentially a pattern-matching machine. It has to find a word in its existing vocabulary that closely matches small, hard, grainy seeds.
And what does Jane Roberts personally associate with small, hard seeds?
Squirrels. In her daily life, she fed the squirrels outside her window. She often used acorns or perceived the peppercorns as looking exactly like the bird feed she put out.
So her brain played a game of Pictionary. The inner self drew a seed, and the conscious mind just shouted squirrel.
Exactly. The signal was pure. The translation was associative. Seth calls this distortion. It does not mean the psychic ability failed. It means the receiver is human. We constantly interpret the unknown through the lens of the known.
This is such a key takeaway for you listening. If you are trying to develop your own intuition, you have to learn to decode your own symbols.
You have to ask yourself, why did I think of a squirrel? What does a squirrel represent to me personally? If you can do that, you find the pepper.
Speaking of human error and messy signals, we really have to talk about the JAB incident. This is the pure comedy relief of the session.
It is, but it is also a profound lesson on how telepathy actually functions.
So Jane says the number 14, JAB.
Rob and Jane are completely confused. They think it is initials. JB, is it a person?
But Seth interrupts later and corrects them. He basically yells, no, it is not a name.
He explains that while Rob was filling the pepper shaker, remember the shaker that was hard to open? He slipped. He jabbed himself.
He literally poked himself in the eye.
He rubbed his eye or poked himself hard. He felt a sudden, sharp physical sensation, a literal jab.
And Jane picked that up.
She picked it up loud and clear. Because telepathy is carried by emotion and intensity. And pain, even a small annoyance like poking your eye, is a very loud signal.
It is way louder than the pepper.
Exactly. The peppers is just sitting there, quietly being peppered. The jab is a massive spike of ouch in the energy field. So Jane's mind just grabbed onto the loudest signal in the room.
JAB. It was not a code at all. It was a literal description of a physical action.
It clearly shows that telepathy is not like reading a text file. It is experiential. You feel what the other person felt.
It really grounds the whole phenomenon. It makes it feel messy and real and human.
Which is exactly what Seth wants. He does not want them to treat this as some mystical, untouchable magic. He wants them to treat it as physics, just physics we do not quite understand yet.
Now, Rob, being the curious guy he always is, asks a question toward the end of the session that connects this back to the survival of the personality.
He asks about contacting the dead.
Specifically, he wants to know if Seth can help Jane contact specific survival personalities.
And Seth gives some advice here that is really counterintuitive. He says, when you are ready, comparative strangers would be best.
Wait, if I want to prove life after death, would I not want to talk to my grandma or my best friend, someone I know intimately?
You would want to emotionally, but scientifically. It is a terrible idea.
Why is that?
Because the squirrel effect we just talked about.
Yeah.
Your subconscious is completely full of memories of your grandma.
Yeah.
You know her voice, you know her smell, you know her stories. It is very, very easy for your brain to construct a fake grandma puppet out of your own memories.
So I am just talking to myself.
Exactly. But if you contact a stranger, someone you know absolutely nothing about, and then you get details that you can verify later in historical records, that is actual proof.
Because the information could not have possibly come from my own brain.
Right. If you channel a guy named Bob from 1890 and he tells you exactly where he hid his gold watch and you go dig it up, that is rock solid evidence. If you channel Grandma and she says, "I love you," that is incredibly sweet, but it is not proof.
Seth is demanding scientific rigor here.
He is. He always pushes for the check. Do not just believe blindly. Test it.
And speaking of testing, there is one final piece of evidence appended to this session. And honestly, it is the most spooky one of all. It is the future echo.
This brings us full circle right back to the spacious present.
So during this session in January 1967, Jane keeps getting these floating, vague impressions. She keeps sensing the initials TM,
Yeah.
and she strongly senses a connection to publishing.
Now, at the time, this means nothing to them. They do not know a TM. They are just privately writing these sessions down in notebooks in their living room. They are not famous yet.
They dismiss it as noise, just random static on the line.
Fast forward, April 1968, more than a full year later.
Jane opens the mail, and there is a letter from an editor at Prentice Hall.
A major publisher.
Yeah, and the editor's name.
Tam Mossman, TM.
And what did Tam Mossman want?
He wanted to publish the Seth Material. He was the editor who would eventually launch the Seth Material, and Seth speaks to the entire world. He was the catalyst that completely changed their lives forever.
So in 1967, while they were sitting in that room guessing about pepper and squirrels, the massive energy of that future book deal was already right there in the room with them.
It was rippling backward in time. The event was so charged, so incredibly important to their whole self, that it created an echo that traveled backward a full year.
Jane picked up the TM signal before TM even knew who she was.
That is the spacious present in action. The future is not waiting to happen. It is happening right now.
Huh?
And sometimes, if we are quiet enough, we can hear it.
That gives me goosebumps every single time I think about it. It validates the entire philosophy they had just been talking about.
It really does. It shows that we are standing in the center of a web. We are vibrating with messages from our past and our future all the time. We just need to learn how to listen to the web.
So we have gone from the architecture of the soul to a pepper shaker, to a squirrel, to a jab in the eye, and finally to a time-traveling book deal. It is a lot to take in.
It is a massive amount. But I think the main takeaway is actually very simple at its core.
So what does this all mean for you listening? The person driving to work or folding laundry or sitting in the dark right now?
It means you are much bigger than you think you are. You need to stop underestimating yourself.
Stop thinking you are just the regional manager.
Exactly. Stop defining yourself by your job or your body or your anxieties. Those are just the camouflage. Those are just the apparent identity.
You are the corporation.
You are the Energy Gestalt. You wrote the blueprint for this life, which means you have the power to understand it and you absolutely have the power to evolve it.
And maybe pay a little more attention to the noise in your head.
Yes, those random thoughts, those sudden urges, the vivid image of a squirrel. Do not just brush them off. They might be vital data. They might be a note from your inner self.
Or a text message from next year.
Precisely.
Now, we only scratched the surface of this session. If you want the full experience, and you really should want the full experience, you need to go directly to the source.
The early sessions. It is a commitment to read, but it is an absolute treasure trove.
We want to give full credit to the Seth Material and the publisher, New Awareness Network. They are the folks keeping this material in print and available to the world.
You can find the books, including the early sessions book 7, at their website. Just go to sethcenter.com for the early sessions.
Go buy the books. Read them. Let your brain get twisted. It is very good for you.
It is really the only way to grow.
So here is a final thought to leave you with. A little homework assignment for your multidimensional self tonight.
I am listening.
Tonight, when you go to sleep, really pay attention. Seth says your dreams are familiar territory. You might be walking through a house you have not bought yet. You might be talking to a friend you have not even met yet.
You might be meeting yourself from 20 years in the future.
If you do see him, try to ask him for the lottery numbers.
Or just ask him if he is happy. That is probably a lot more important.
And whatever you do, try not to jab him in the eye.
Safety first.
On that chilling note, thank you for listening to this deep dive. Stay curious, stay spacious, and we will see you in the next one. Remember, this deep dive is distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes. Catch you next time.